A huge manhunt is underway in Surrey after a man was stabbed to death in front of his teenage son on a train. President Trump has said he's prepared for the federal government shutdown to go on for months or even years. Anglo-Russian relations are under pressure after the Foreign Secretary rebuked Moscow over the arrest of a man with dual British-American nationality. Hundreds of German politicians and celebrities have had their personal details hacked and posted online. Also tonight, Ryanair has been voted Europe's worst airline, again, and the couple who won £115 million and celebrated with a cup of tea. Police say that a man who was stabbed to death on a train in Surrey was with his 14-year-old son at the time. They've described it as a horrific and hugely traumatic attack. A major manhunt is underway for the killer who fled from the London-bound train further down the line. Our correspondent, Richard Galpin, reports from Surrey.
The man who carried out this attack and his victim had boarded a train in Guildford heading to London at lunchtime. They're not believed to have been known to each other. In the few minutes it took to reach Clarendon, the next stop up the line, a vicious fight had broken out, according to an eyewitness, leaving one man dead with multiple stab wounds. The 51-year-old man had been travelling with his teenage son. Superintendent Paul Langley of British Transport Police gave more details.
The victim boarded the train at around 1 p.m. at London Road Station in Guildford, along with his 14-year-old son. Traumatically, the victim's son would have been nearby when his father was fatally wounded. This would have been an horrific and hugely traumatic event to have witnessed, and we're providing him with as much support as possible.
The attacker got off the train at Clarendon and fled. The police searched for him throughout the day in this wealthy rural area, including using helicopters. They also appealed to anyone who'd witnessed the incident to contact British Transport Police as soon as possible, even if they did not think they had any relevant information. By the evening, the police announced they had a description of a potential suspect. A black man in his 20s or 30s, 6 feet tall, with a beard, wearing black clothes and white trainers. There have apparently been several sightings. So far, though, there's been no arrest. The man is still on the run, following this highly unusual killing on a train in broad daylight.
President Trump says he's willing to allow a partial government closure that's already lasted 2 weeks to go on for months or even years unless he's given $5 billion to build a wall on the border with Mexico. The Democrats have accused him of holding millions of Americans hostage. Around 800,000 federal workers are affected by the shutdown. Some are working without pay, while others have been forced to take unpaid leave. From Washington, David Willis reports.
The 90-minute meeting in the Situation Room of the White House was by all accounts a contentious affair, with both sides once again refusing to yield on their key positions. Democrats, emboldened by the control they now wield over the House of Representatives in this new Congress, are refusing to give ground, whilst President Trump has rejected an offer to reopen most of the departments affected by the shutdown, whilst talks continue over security along the border. Heading into a third week of the stalemate, the discussions have descended into a messy display of muscle flexing on both sides, with the president insisting he'll keep the government closed for months, if not years, if that's what's needed to get his way, and even threatening to use emergency powers to circumvent Congress and utilise funding intended for the Department of Defense to build the wall.
This is national security we're talking about. We're not talking about games. We're talking about national security. This should have been done by all of the presidents that preceded me, and they all know it. Some of them have told me that we should have done it. So we're not playing games. We have to do it.
Meanwhile, museums here in the nation's capital remain closed, staffing at national parks has been reduced to a minimum, and rubbish is piling up around the White House and the National Mall. 800,000 government workers have either been sent home or are working without pay. The Democrats' leader in the Senate is Chuck Schumer.
The bottom line is very simple. We made a plea to the president once again. Don't hold millions of Americans, hundreds of thousands of workers hostage. Open up the government and let's continue the discussions. It's very hard to see how progress will be made unless they open up the government.
The president has assigned a team to continue negotiations over the weekend, but he has precious little room for compromise. Building the wall was Mr. Trump's rallying cry on the campaign trail, and he's well aware that failing to deliver on an issue so closely identified with his bid for the White House could cost him dearly when the time comes for him to seek re-election.
The US economy created more than 300,000 jobs in December, nearly twice as many as predicted. Shares on Wall Street rose sharply on the news, also boosted by comments by Jerome Powell, the head of the US Central Bank, the Federal Reserve. Mr. Powell said that he wouldn't resign if asked to by President Trump, who's been sharply critical of recent hikes in interest rates. Here's our economics correspondent, Andrew Walker.
Jerome Powell was President Trump's own choice for chairman of the Federal Reserve, the head of the country's central bank. But the president has taken exception to the decisions taken by the Fed under Mr. Powell. Last year it raised interest rates 4 times. Mr. Trump has described the policy as a big mistake and the Fed as crazy and loco. There have been reports that he considered firing the Fed chairman, though it's not clear that he has the power to do so. Today, Mr. Powell took part in a panel discussion with his 2 predecessors and was asked by the moderator of the event about his relations with the president.
Have you received anything direct from the White House about unhappiness with the path of rates or discussion of any change in your job?
No, I've not. I have not. I have no news for you on that.
If the president asked you to resign, would you do it?
No.
Shortly before this event, the US government published its monthly report on the employment situation. It showed the largest rise in the number of jobs since February. Although most investors don't expect more increases in interest rates this year, a succession of equally strong labour market reports could change that and lead the Fed to take action that would further antagonise the president.
The Foreign Secretary, Jeremy Hunt, has warned Russia against playing diplomatic chess games with people's lives after a man with dual British and American nationality was charged with spying in Moscow. Paul Whelan, who also holds an Irish passport, was detained a week ago, accused by the FSB security service of carrying out an act of espionage. The detention comes at a time of already strained relations between the Kremlin and the UK government, as our diplomatic correspondent James Landale reports.
The arrest of Paul Whelan in Moscow last week began as a mystery, but it's now threatening to turn into a diplomatic standoff. The 48-year-old former US Marine, who's also a British citizen, is facing unspecified charges of espionage. One Russian news agency has made unconfirmed claims that when Mr. Whelan was detained by federal security officers in a Moscow hotel, he had just been passed a memory stick containing the names of local intelligence officials. His family say he is innocent and was in Moscow for a wedding. Jeremy Hunt said his officials had offered consular assistance but had yet to be granted access. The Foreign Secretary said he was extremely worried about Mr. Whelan, who he said should not be used as a pawn for diplomatic leverage.
We need to see what these charges are against him, understand whether there is a case or not. We are giving every support that we can, but we don't agree with individuals being used in diplomatic chess games.
There's been speculation that Mr. Whelan might have been arrested so he could be exchanged for a Russian woman who was jailed in the United States last month. Maria Butina, a pro-gun activist, admitted trying to influence US conservative groups on behalf of the Russian government, something Moscow denies. So far, the US response has been relatively cautious. But Mr. Hunt's robust warning shows that he at least remains willing to speak out against Moscow. Anglo-Russian relations, which are already poor following the Salisbury poisoning incident last year, seem unlikely to improve soon. Mr. Hunt said the Foreign Office was actively considering the safety of other Britons in Russia, and its travel advice was constantly under review.
The family of Paul Whelan said his arrest was desperately worrying and appealed to the US Congress and the State Department to help bring him home. Our Moscow correspondent, Sarah Rainsford, has been finding out more about him.
Paul Whelan has been interested in Russia for many years. In 2006, when he was serving with the US Marines in Iraq, he even chose to travel here for his 2 weeks annual leave. It was because of that local knowledge that his twin brother says he was invited to act as a kind of tour guide for a friend's wedding in Moscow late last month. An old web page run by Mr. Whelan describes another trip to Russia in 2008, which he calls the long-held dream of someone who grew up during the Cold War. The page is filled with photos of tourist sites, the Soviet cartoon character Cheburashka, and friends he met on his travels. They include those he'd made previously on social media sites, including the Russian equivalent of Facebook, VK. Two of those men have told me that they were shocked by his arrest. One described Paul Whelan as friendly and easygoing and fascinated by Russia and its culture. Other contacts do appear to have military connections, but again they say there was nothing suspicious in Mr. Whelan's conduct. If he's a spy, then I'm Michael Jackson. One man who has military imagery among his profile pictures wrote to me. All describe Paul Whelan's spoken Russian as basic at best, though he often posted comments in Russian on social media sites, apparently using an online translator.
The government is to test its plans for coping with border disruption in Kent if Britain leaves the EU without a deal. Up to 150 lorries will be involved in the exercise on Monday in the Ramsgate and Dover areas. The port of Ramsgate is being dredged to allow ferries to dock for the first time in years, a key element of the no-deal preparations. More details from Richard Lister.
The Port of Dover handles almost 5 million vehicles a year, more than half are heavy goods vehicles, which under EU rules require no customs checks. But a no-deal Brexit would mean inspecting all goods shipped from the continent, with the potential for significant disruption at Dover and the other Channel ports. The government's planning to use Ramsgate Harbour to take some of Dover's ferry traffic in the event of no deal. But Ramsgate hasn't handled a ferry service since 2013, and Rod Mackenzie from the Road Haulage Association says the fact that preparatory work there has only just begun is deeply concerning.
Only 60 days to go, and remember the traffic crowding into this port. The port isn't used to it, so there's all sorts of problems with the potential backlog, customs chaos, and lorries just congested all over Kent.
Mr Mackenzie also criticised the fact that Seabourn Freight, the company given the contract to operate ferries from Ramsgate, has never run a ferry service and has no ships. The Transport Secretary, Chris Grayling, said Seabourn was on track to be ready by April. On Monday, the Department for Transport will test its plan for alleviating lorry congestion and the result of a no-deal Brexit. It will use Manston Airfield north of Dover as a staging post for up to 150 HGVs. The government said it doesn't want or expect a no-deal Brexit, but needs to prepare for all eventualities.
The Democratic Unionist Party has further dented Theresa May's hopes of getting her Brexit deal through Parliament, saying it strongly opposes the arrangement. A Commons vote takes place later this month. The DUP's Brexit spokesman, Sammy Wilson, said businesses and farmers in Northern Ireland should be totally relaxed about leaving without a deal. Here's our political correspondent, Jonathan Blake.
On her return from the Christmas break, the Prime Minister has been confronted with a brutal reminder of the scale of the challenge she faces to get her Brexit deal approved by Parliament. There's little sign that Conservative or Labour MPs have changed their minds about voting against the plan when it comes before the Commons later this month. And the Prime Minister's supposed allies in the DUP appear to still be dead against the agreement. Despite a charm offensive, senior party members had lunch with Mrs May in Downing Street yesterday. There isn't much evidence of progress for Number 10. This morning, the DUP's Brexit spokesman Sammy Wilson said nothing they'd heard from Brussels had encouraged them to back the deal.
We're more alarmed at what is coming out from the EU and especially from the Irish government, who have made it quite clear that they do not see this as some temporary arrangement or some insurance policy. But in fact, Leo Varadkar has said within the last 2 weeks that he sees this as the settled arrangement.
Dozens of Tory MPs look set to vote against the deal regardless of any further assurances about what's called the backstop, which would prevent a hard border in Ireland if no trade deal was agreed. They're worried the government might agree a permanent trade deal that sees the whole of the UK staying close to the EU's regulations and customs arrangements. But the Prime Minister has continued her efforts to get more reassurances with calls to some of her European counterparts. This afternoon, a conversation with the President of the European Commission, Jean-Claude Juncker, was described as friendly.
France is calling up police reservists and starting motorcycle patrols on beaches around Calais to try to prevent migrants from crossing the Channel to Britain. The measures are being introduced as part of a joint action plan agreed by the Home Secretary Sajid Javid and his French counterpart. A Royal Navy ship has been sent to the Dover Strait to patrol the waters until 2 Border Force cutters, currently in the Mediterranean, are redeployed. More details from our Paris correspondent, Lucy Williamson.
Of the 500 migrants who tried to cross the Channel in small boats last year, the UK says around 80% of them left between October and December. French officials agree that there's been a sharp rise in attempted crossings since October, and the two countries have agreed to strengthen policing. French reservists are being called up to reinforce police patrols along the coast, and helicopters are being used to support the Coast Guard so that the waters off Calais are monitored at all times. Fabienne Soudry, Commissioner for the local government in Calais, told the BBC that police would be equipped with off-road motorcycles and night vision goggles to patrol the dunes along the coast, and that security cameras and extra lighting would be installed at the port of Boulogne-sur-Mer, from where boats have been stolen. Mr Soudry said the arrest of 14 migrants on New Year's Eve showed that measures introduced since October were working, and that no migrants had been seen crossing the Channel in the past couple of days. These crossings are very dangerous, Mr Soudry said. Our aim is to save lives and avoid a tragedy. But the numbers crossing by boat were dwarfed by the many thousands trying to cross in trucks, he said, and the main migration route remains the land.
Up to 1,000 politicians, celebrities and journalists in Germany, including the Chancellor Angela Merkel, have fallen victim to what's being described as the country's biggest ever leak of personal data. The information was posted on Twitter last month in the style of an advent calendar, but was only discovered by officials yesterday. Our Berlin correspondent, Damien McGuinness, has the details.
Germany's political class has been hit by this attack. Letters to and from Angela Merkel have been hacked. Party leaders have seen their home addresses, mobile phone numbers, and even family photos and correspondence published online. Private bank statements and credit card details have also been made public. The only political party not affected is the right-wing populist Alternative for Germany, or AfD. Celebrities have also been targeted, including a famous comedian, an actor, and a number of musicians, all of whom are renowned for being politically outspoken and critical of right-wing extremism. This has led an MP in Mrs Merkel's Conservative Party to accuse the far right of being responsible. Others believe the hackers might have links to Russia or China. But so far there is no evidence to support these theories. Germany's Justice Minister Katharina Barley said that no sensitive information had been leaked from the Chancellor's office, but stated that whoever is behind this wants to damage faith in our democracy ahead of key elections this year.
Police in the southern Indian state of Kerala say a third woman has entered a Hindu temple which is closed to women of menstruating age. On Wednesday, 2 women made history by entering the Sabarimala shrine 3 months after India's top court revoked the ban. There's strong opposition to the ruling, which has led to violent demonstrations. Yogita Lemurye reports from Mumbai.
3 women have now entered Sabarimala, considered one of the holiest Hindu temples in India. Bindu Amani, who's 40, was one of the 2 women who first entered the shrine this week, escorted by policemen in plain clothes. She's now being kept in a safe house by the government because of threats to her life. She told the BBC why she was so eager to go into the temple.
The things happened in Sabarimala is violation of equality. And I like to establish or implement the judgment given by Supreme Court. The implementation of this judgment is also helps to implement gender justice in our society.
The women's entry into the shrine triggered mass protests in Kerala. Violent clashes broke out and 1 person was killed. The temple is devoted to a god who's believed to be celibate. And so, many Hindus are opposed to women of menstruating age going inside it. The issue has also become politically contentious in the run-up to a national election later this year. Both the ruling BJP party and the opposition Congress have not supported the court's decision. Kerala's local government, though, agrees with the verdict and has said it's fulfilling its constitutional responsibility by protecting the women who choose to go to Sabarimala.
There's been a mixed reaction to new guidance which casts doubt on whether using screens is actually damaging for children. The Royal College of Paediatrics and Child Health said there was insufficient evidence to suggest that time limits on the use of computers, smartphones and tablets were needed. Its guidance says parents are best placed to decide what's right for their child. Some have welcomed the advice as common sense, but others say it doesn't go far enough. Here's our medical correspondent, Fergus Walsh.
The Royal College drew up its advice after a comprehensive review of available evidence on the impact of screen time on children's health. That evidence is patchy and mostly looks at television rather than smartphones or computers. Does heavy screen use cause obesity and depression in children? There are many studies which suggest a link, but the Royal College says the evidence simply isn't strong enough to prove it. It says families should negotiate time limits with their children depending on how screen use impacts on sleep, physical and social activities. One professor of applied statistics called the advice admirably sensible and practical. Cherise Blackman from South London has 3 children aged 9 to 14. She says the guidance that children should not use screens in the hour before bed is already applied in her house.
I take everything away at bedtime. I take laptops, tablets, phones away just because there's no kind of distraction, no notifications, no pings, just completely take it away at bedtime. For me, it's really important. I think they need to get their rest. I do think that's something that young kids are struggling with, is getting adequate rest.
Lynn Knapp, headmistress of Windmill Primary School in Oxford, says modern technology can be damaging.
Social media and screen time can actually be quite detrimental to children's development because they're things that we see in school in terms of children's readiness for school when they're coming in when they're 5. If they've been put in front of a screen a lot, they don't have a vocabulary that they can come into school and then interact with other children with.
The Royal College admits that much more research is needed, especially on the impact of social media on the young. So its guidance will not be the last word on this contentious issue.
New figures show that more than 400 people filed for divorce online over the festive period, with 13 applications on Christmas Day. The relationship charity Relate says the additional stress and financial pressures of Christmas can exacerbate problems in a marriage. Figures showing that the growth in house prices has nearly ground to a halt in many areas have prompted warnings about the uncertainty caused by Brexit. The nationwide building society says the average price of a home grew by just 0.5% last year, although property in Northern Ireland and Wales did much better. Our personal finance correspondent Simon Gompertz has the details.
In quieter times, the state of the housing market depends on buyers' confidence about their finances and especially about their jobs. Right now, employment is at a record high and wages are rising on average faster than prices, both factors which should fuel competition for an inadequate supply of homes and push up prices. Yet the opposite is happening. Prices did rise across last year, but more slowly than figures in the summer and autumn implied, and London saw a fall of nearly 1%, with London's commuter belt dropping by almost 1.5%. It was different elsewhere. Yorkshire and the Humber up 3.7% last year, Wales up 4% and Northern Ireland up nearly 6%. But in just the month of December, the average UK house price fell, a development which Nationwide attributes to the uncertain economic outlook surrounding Brexit. One forecasting firm, the Ernst & Young Item Club, which uses the Treasury's model of the economy, reacted by predicting a disorderly departure from the EU could result in a 5% drop in house values. Nationwide is more cautious, suggesting that if and when the Brexit uncertainty clears, 2019 could see the rate of increase return to around 2% a year.
In the city, the 100 share index closed up 146 points at 6,838. On Wall Street, the Dow Jones ended the day at its highest level in 2 weeks, up 747 points at 23,433. On the currency markets, against the dollar, the pound was up 0.9 cents at $1.27.1, and against the euro, the pound was also up 0.9 cents at €1.11.5, which makes a euro worth 89.7 pence. Ryanair has been voted the worst short-haul airline for the 6th year running in a survey by the consumer group Which. The airline had to cancel scores of flights this summer because of a series of strikes by its pilots and cabin crew around Europe. Here's our transport correspondent, Tom Burridge.
which surveyed nearly 8,000 of its members about their recent experiences flying short-haul from the UK. Each of the 19 airlines was rated on criteria such as boarding, how comfortable the seats were, customer service and value for money. Which said no other airline came close to what it described as Ryanair's dismal score. Thomas Cook and Wizz Air also came out badly, with EasyJet finishing somewhere in the middle and Jet2 near the top. Ryanair called the ratings irrelevant. The low-cost carrier said it was now carrying 141 million passengers each year, an increase of 78% in 6 years. It is by far Europe's largest low-cost airline.
2 workers at the Chinese telecoms firm Huawei have been punished for sending New Year greetings from phones made by their employer's American rival, Apple. They used Huawei's official Twitter account, and their messages included the words, "via Twitter for iPhone." It's believed they've been demoted and have had their salaries reduced. A couple from Northern Ireland say they're looking forward to sharing their good fortune after winning almost £115 million in the EuroMillions lottery draw. Francis and Patrick Connolly from Moira in County Down won the prize on New Year's Day. The pair, both in their 50s, used to work in business development and as a teacher. Our Ireland correspondent Chris Page has been to meet them.
Keep shaking it! Yay! Keep smiling!
It's the happiest of New Year's for Francis and Patrick Connolly, the winners of the 4th biggest lottery prize ever awarded in the UK. Francis was knitting a jumper at home when Patrick told her their numbers had come up.
And so I just turned the computer around to her and said,
I think I've got some good news for you. And I could see the lottery ticket up and I thought, well, it must be more than £2.60. He won £2.60 the week before. And I thought he was going to say, I've got £1,000 or something. He said, no, you're misunderstanding me. We've won.
After celebrating with a hug and a cup of tea, their first thought was that they would share their win with friends and family, not least their 3 daughters and 3 grandchildren.
The only thing we've done is make a list of all the people we're going to give money to. And it sounds unselfish to be giving it away, but it's going to be so much fun.
The couple say they've never been poor, but have had everyday financial worries. Now they're planning to replace their Renault, buy a new bungalow and go to watch the Monaco Grand Prix. At their news conference, one reporter asked if they were now concerned about their personal security. Frances said she hadn't considered it.
I've never met anybody I wouldn't take down myself, to be fair.
Patrick and Frances have started 2019 by becoming fabulously wealthy in just a few seconds. But they're most looking forward to making some other people into millionaires with their cash giveaways.
Well, now for a look at the front pages of the morning papers, and the murder of a 51-year-old man in an apparently random stabbing on a train is on several of them. The Daily Express says the victim was attacked in front of his 14-year-old son after an argument broke out near Guildford in Surrey. The Daily Telegraph quotes a number of eyewitnesses around Clandon where the killer jumped off the train. One described a suspicious man who was very sweaty and nervous. Another described how the man had said that he was in a lot of trouble before running off and leaving his hat behind. The Guardian leads on what it calls a clash between regions and the government over fracking. The paper reports that Greater Manchester will, in effect, stop companies from extracting underground shale gas in the region. The Eyes headline sums it up as UK fracking in jeopardy and reports that Scotland, Wales, London, Leeds and Hull are also among those opposed to the industry because of fears over its environmental impact. 27 universities are paying police millions of pounds a year to protect students, according to The Times. The paper says the funds are being spent on officers and dedicated patrols amid concerns that campuses have become a magnet for thieves and drug dealers. And the Daily Mirror claims that Prince Harry will join one of Britain's biggest war exercises for 20 years. The paper says the training mission in Norway is a warning to the Russian President, Vladimir Putin. The headlines again. Police in Surrey are searching for the killer of a man who was stabbed to death on a train in front of his teenage son. President Trump has told senior Democrats he's willing to let a partial government shutdown last for months or even years, unless he's given $5 billion to build a wall on the border with Mexico. The Foreign Secretary has warned Russia not to use UK citizens as pawns in diplomatic chess games, following the arrest of a former US Marine with dual British-American nationality. And hackers in Germany have leaked the personal data of leading politicians and celebrities, including Chancellor Merkel. BBC News.
Read by Charles Carroll. Now let's see what the weather holds in store for us. Here's Philip Avery.
Charles, thanks very much indeed. Very good evening to you. Let's take a look at Friday's vital statistics first of all, and then we'll move on to the prospects for the weekend. First of all, Baltasar was the warm spot of the day, relatively, 9.5 degrees Celsius. The wet spot, relatively, Ferral, 2.2 millimetres of rain fell there. The sunshine capital was Bournemouth with 6.4 hours of sunshine. Now, some of those gaps are likely to persist in the cloud across some of the southern counties, particularly the southwestern counties of England, maybe the far south of Wales overnight, and as a consequence the temperatures will dip away, so there could well be quite a significant frost there. One or two gaps further north and east, perhaps the eastern side of the Pennines, the eastern side of Scotland too, but generally speaking there's a lot of cloud trapped underneath an area of high pressure which has been around for a day or two at least now, giving us a lot of cloudy but essentially a lot of dry weather. So some detail for Saturday. First of all, to England and Wales. What gaps persist on after dawn across that southwestern quarter may well close up during the course of the morning, and then a great deal of England and Wales should be in for a dry, cloudy, fairly still sort of day. The odd mist and fog patch perhaps to start off with, but nothing to write home about. Perhaps the best of the sunshine come the afternoon will be found to the eastern side of the Pennines, but it won't do much for the temperatures, somewhere in a range of about 4 to 7 degrees, on a par with today, should just about cover it. Northern Ireland for the most part essentially cloudy right throughout the day. That cloud may just thicken up during the course of the latter part of the afternoon as a weather front tries to muscle its way in from the Atlantic, not amounting to very much, I have to say. Temperatures here again locked in single figures. And finally for the day to Scotland, here the best of the brightness, as I say, could well be found across some eastern parts, sheltered from the southwesterly breeze, so that ushers in a lot of cloud towards those western areas, and again the cloud thickens late on in the day across northern and western parts for the odd bit of rain. I suspect Scotland though sees the very best of the sunshine during the course of Sunday. Elsewhere a really rather cloudy day. That's the forecast. I wish you a peaceful night. Good night.